Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Gray. Thank you for your patience. I am the Public Services Coordinator for FSCJ's Library and Tutoring Services. I want to thank you today for joining us for the Muse Still Speaks Archival Explorations of FSCJ's Kalliope Magazine. This event, which is part of the college's 60th anniversary calendar, is sponsored by the library and features a panel of distinguished guests from the University of Florida, who will be discussing the importance of Kalliope Magazine and how they continue to use it in their teaching and research. But first, for those of you who might not be familiar with Kalliope, I wanted to take a minute to offer a brief introduction. In 1974, a poetry study group that met weekly to read and discuss contemporary women's poetry organized itself as the Jacksonville Women's Poetry Collective. 3 years later, that group reorganized under the auspices of Florida Junior College's Center for the Continuing Education of Women and decided, with the college's assistance, to apply for state funding in order to facilitate the creation of a journal devoted to the work of women artists and writers. In 1978, the Florida Arts Council awarded them a grant of $5,000, which the college matched, and Kalliope, a journal of women's art, was born. The name Kalliope was chosen because, according to the creators, the muse of epic poetry represents the standard of excellence we are seeking, and the progress of women in the arts, both individually and collectively, may be seen as a kind of epic journey. The first issue, edited by Betty Bedell, came out in February of 1979. Over the course of its 30-year run, Bedell was succeeded as editor by Peggy Friedman, Sharon Whiteman, Margaret Clark, and most notably, Mary Sue Keppel, who served in that position from 1988 to 2005. Kalliope published interviews with and sponsored events by major authors, including Margaret Atwood, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Alice Walker, and produced special issues dedicated to featuring the works of women over 60, women under 30, and artists and writers with disabilities. By the time the magazine marked its 20th anniversary, it had been reviewed on NPR and was receiving almost 2,000 submissions each year from contributors across the United States and from countries as far away as Australia, Pakistan, and China. Kalliope even took to the air on Stereo 90, where every week for years, the members read the issues as part of a segment for the visually impaired, and for which they won an award from the National Association of Reading Services. In 1993, the magazine founded the Sue Senil Elkind National Poetry Contest, which offered a first prize of $1,000 and was judged by acclaimed poets such as Joy Harjo, who would later become the U.S. Poet Laureate. Kalliope published its last issue, a celebration of its 30th anniversary, in 2008, before going on what turned out to be a permanent hiatus. But its story does not end there. It continues to live on in the archives of both FSCJ, where the full collection is available digitally, and the University of Florida. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'll pass it to our first guest. Florence Turcotte provides curatorial services for UF's literary, women's, historical, and LGBTQ archival collections. She's been at UF for over 20 years, and we're happy to have her with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Jennifer said, my title is Literary Manuscripts Archivist at the George A. Smathers Libraries at the University of Florida in Gainesville. I first became aware of Kalliope, a journal of women's literature and art, when I was still in library school and working part-time as assistant to the rare books librarian here at Smathers Library in the early 2000s. We had a run of the journals in rare books, and I was responsible for shelving a new issue as it came in. So of course I stopped and I thumbed through a few of the issues, and I ended up plopping down in the stacks to read them more closely, on the clock, of course. So soon after, I was promoted to my current position in 2005, and Mary Sue Keppel retired as editor and moved to Gainesville. She reached out to me, and we began discussing how she wanted her papers and the Kalliope records that she had produced preserved. Since I had been already familiar with Kalliope from my furtive reading experience in the stacks, I appreciated the research value of the potential Kalliope archive. Mary Sue invited me to her home office, and I saw that the papers that she had collected were in excellent condition and well organized. We acquired the collection in 2008 by donation and quickly processed the collection and made it available to our researchers and instructors, which I continue to do to this day. Marsha Bryant, Professor Marsha Bryant from the English department at UF, and her students will discuss further the ways in which they use the journal and its archive in their work. Happy to be here.
Okay. And from there, we're going to pass to Dr. Marsha Bryant. Dr. Bryant teaches modernism, British and American poetry, and women's writing. Her book, Women's Poetry and Popular Culture, receives support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and she has forthcoming pieces on punk pedagogy, Bob Dylan, and Sylvia Plath. Dr. Bryant?
Hi, thanks so much. Before I tell you a tad more about me, I just want to thank Jennifer Gray so much for inviting us to join this, and also for her outstanding work with archival materials at Florida State University at Jacksonville. So Florida State College at Jacksonville. It's just an incredible resources you will see. So I am in my 37th year teaching mostly literature at the University of Florida. So I learned about Calliope when I was working on my women's poetry book. I was so pleased to find out it was so close by in Jacksonville. Florida's been my adopted state for 37 years. And so for me and for my students, just the pleasure of connecting with part of Florida history was pretty amazing. I've had the pleasure of talking with Mary Sue Koppel. She was a longtime editor of the magazine. She's retired here in Gainesville at Oak Hammock Community. And so when I learned about the papers, I just decided I had to bring my students to this wonderful resource that we all have digitally and some physical things also in Gainesville. I will share a post I wrote about communities in the chat afterwards. And my browser today does not want me to share my archive sheet, but don't worry, I'll give you a link in the chat after I've finished. So I tap Calliope in my undergraduate and graduate classes. It looked like I have some copies. If you go to Chample's Book Mine in Jacksonville, you can find some copies. And Mary Sue gave me some, but I gave them to Flo for our archive. And so my brief remarks are going to focus on how students react to the magazine, both the digital archive, which is accessible to all y'all out there in webinar land, and also the papers. And then I will transition to some alums from my recent class on how to teach women's writing. So the magazine featured poetry, but it didn't just have poetry. Also, part of the work that my amazing alum grad students did was coming up with new pedagogies. So I think the digital archive is an amazing thing. You could teach layout, you could teach design, you could teach literature, you could teach curating with Calliope because there's a lot of art reproductions in it. So I just encourage everyone to tap that digital resource for all kinds of new ways of teaching. So here are 7 things about Calliope I had for you. So when we study poetry at school, we're usually going to encounter it like this. Maybe an introductory textbook to poems. It might be a literary anthology. It might be a book of one poet's works, a selection of them, or more likely individual web links to the individual poems. And so the format through which we access a poem is going to shape how we see a poem and how we see poems' connections to other things in the world. So is this a poem an isolated work, all islanded, like on a web link? Is it a sample of just one person, like in the selected poems? But if we read poems in literary magazines, including some that are active today, University of Florida has Subtropics in the English department, and I subscribe and do actually limerick reviews for the Massachusetts Review. So if we look at a poem in a literary magazine, it is sharing space in larger conversations. So the poems in Calliope, they share space with poems by other writers. Some are established, some it might be the first poem they've ever published. So you're getting different generations in Calliope. The poems in Calliope also share space with short stories and other prose pieces. It also shares space with some pretty incredible glossy reproductions of artworks, visual artworks. And they share space with editors' introductions, notes about that issue's contributors. My students were looking at an issue, the inaugural issue, and just loved that one of the contributors talked about her job at a grocery store, how she writes at night. She was pleased not to get a rejection letter. So you get a sense that these are real people taking time from their everyday life to write and share their artistic work. You also get information about how you could submit to Calliope and how you could subscribe to it. So I made an archive worksheet I'll share with you. And so this is how I get most of my students linking to Calliope through the digital archive. When I have a smaller class, I can bring them into our gracious host, our archivist and literary manuscripts curator, Florence Turcotte. So what I do, and you'll see it on my worksheet I share in a bit, it's a chart, it's a table, and they take their notes, their reactions to cover design. So you'll see there's a row for visual art, editorial presence, um, other literature, and the poetry. You'll see when I share the link, the link I'm sharing is a downloadable copy, so you don't overwrite the version I'm using right now in my class. So the middle section is for classes that get to go see Mary Sue Koppel's papers in the library. And if you want to teach with this digital archive, I tack on a final section, and it's usually connected to an assignment that my students will do later in the semester that taps Calliope. The course I'm teaching right now on American women's poetry, it's a small seminar, so they have to create, they have to pretend they're a curator, and they have to choose some syllabus poets that they think could fit into a theme of their choice, and they have to choose a foremother. Early American poet Anne Bradstreet was the foremother of Calliope, and they quote from one of her poems in every issue. So mostly what I'm going to do in my remaining few things is I want to share just a recent course. These are all undergraduates. There were 35 of them. They were not all English majors. Kind of what they thought of the 20th anniversary issue, and that is from January 1st, 1999. So my students were quite taken with the digital archive. So that's what they used, accessible to all of us. Kara said, it felt like walking through an exhibit, but on paper. For Alex, browsing the 20th anniversary quote was a real interactive experience, especially when the editor placed drawings or paintings on the same spread or on either side of a page. Alyssa, who's disturbed enough to take another class with me this semester. That was a joke. So Alyssa was struck by finding a story. The story is called The Corner of Park and Macintosh. Those of you that live in Jacksonville might know these streets. So Alyssa was so captivated that the story is just a couple of blocks from where her parents still live in Jacksonville. And she felt that the magazine seemed almost contemporary, even though it was from 1999. Another track of student responses I'd like to share. Several students really valued experiencing the women's writing alongside the artworks and how they worked in tandem in presenting women in non-stereotypical ways. So Madison said, I loved the art of the women staring out the windows, as if longing for something. One photograph is called an indoor cat, and it's as if this woman is an indoor cat longing to be let outside, letting her experience something new. Maybe she wants freedom. So Jade, again, this is the 1999 20th anniversary January issue. Jade appreciated all the artworks depicting women's bodies because she said they don't seem sexualized. She thought they were realistic depictions of women's bodies more than, as she said, look at this pretty naked lady. So yeah, the Calliope really helped them kind of broaden their sense of, okay, does a women's magazine of writing, does it limit or does it allow for some kind of spectrum of artistic representation? In browsing the poetry, the focus of my class, the students were struck by the diversity of poems, both in terms of their theme and their style. In my current course on women's poetry, we just talked about, I was teaching Gertrude Stein. Some of you may know Gertrude Stein, experimental writer. And so we did the special issue, the topic on prose poems and flash fiction that Calliope did. And it really helped my students get a sense of where would you draw the boundary between a prose poem and a flash fiction, and so that was very helpful. And so my students as a whole, they were expecting some poems to be about domesticity, food, motherhood, and relationships. But they saw that these poems in Calliope took unexpected turns. They also noticed poems about consumption, including shopping, consuming entertainment, poems about sensations, poems about nature. Come on, you can't, I mean, they're not all from Florida, they're from all over, but come on, Florida, we like poems about nature, desire and death. For Elena, this wide scope within women's poetry is especially enlightening. She said, reading the poems in Calliope reinforced my feelings that women's poetry is not just about pain, desire, or longing, but that it can also be about belonging, about triumph. The final thing I'd like to say is looking at the Mary Sue Koppel papers, my students who get to see that, they're all moved by just how much work it takes to start a literary magazine. It's not like you can just get a website and just boom, you've got a magazine. So my students were moved by seeing Mary Sue Koppel's applications for funding, asking for a teaching relief. She told me she was usually teaching 5 sections of freshman composition. She's fundraisers Calliope had, grants from the state, all of these activities. And so again, just to end where I started, I think it's all about community. 2 classes of women's writing and pedagogy ago, I printed them out and took them at my last conversation with Mary Sue. And she was just so inspired by what this new generation of teachers comes up with. And she said, I only got to teach freshman composition when I was there. And I just love all the creativity and just how this legacy we have, it can go into all kinds of courses. So I will share those things to you in the chat. And thank you so much again, Jennifer. And I'll give it to the future now.
All right, well, thank you so much. Now we're going to hear from some of the student researchers who have worked with Calliope, starting with C.R. Dean. C.R. is a first-generation doctoral student and literary scholar who examines 19th to 21st century American and Victorian British literature and visual media to analyze mixed-race identity, caricatures, and minstrelsy. Her forthcoming essays are about Wilkie Collins's The Women in White, J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, and Jessie Redmond's Fawcett's Plum Bun. C.R.?
My computer decided to switch the mics on me. Thank you so much for the introduction. As Dr. Bryant indicated, we were brought into the archives and asked to consider both what these pieces could do, the work that they were performing, not just from a materials perspective, but from an organizational lens, and even to consider the images and texts that were used. And so for myself as well, from an educational perspective, much like Dr. Bryant released us into the archive, I would also invite students at an undergraduate level to engage with the Kalliope collection, curated with a set of opening questions to help guide their thinking and their archival work. I found that when releasing undergraduates, especially if they don't have direction, they kind of flounder a little bit and they'll come back to you and be like, should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? And so giving them a super broad opening question like a Socratic seminar helps them to still retain their own creative side, but have a direction with which to follow. I plan to use the Kalliope collection the next time that I teach a course involving Grecian or Roman myth, particularly as I like to teach both myth and adaptation. Viewing Kalliope through the lens of adaptation invites discourse from the students as they view the ways that image, space, and text reincorporate myth, ideas, and beliefs within. Calliope's integration of past and present alongside contemporary concerns, i.e., inclusivity or exclusivity, themes of pregnancy and motherhood, as well as the intertextualities and references of that nature. There were several images that I viewed in both the physical and digital archives that drew my attention, coded to our opening idea of women's writing and pedagogy and the question of who is it for. I found myself questioning cover images, reasoning, etc., and even the language of the texts and materials within and their cohesive or non-cohesive natures. As such, it became a productive conversation for me to look at a subject like women's writings and denaturalize its massive correlation, to unpack how many subtopics and separate topics of importance are added to the conversation. And so I took a lot of time looking at form, whether that was because they were replicating Grecian statues. I found for myself they were using a lot of forms of motherhood or childhood. And so then I found myself asking questions of if the texts or materials within were connected in any way to that thematic, or what it would mean if they were disconnected. In some ways, I found kind of a mutuality of both, with more of a reference to other literary forms, whether it was Alice in Wonderland, other contemporary materials that were coming out from authors and things of that nature, and also just the movement of women through society, not only in the form of what they were producing, but in what they were showing to the reader within the pages of the magazine. I could probably continue to speak a lot more on that, but I will happily turn it over to one of my colleagues.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to go now to Annesha Palit. Annesha is a first-generational doctoral student hailing from India. Her research interests range from children's literature to disability studies to pedagogy. And I think she should be sharing her screen. Is she having difficulty?
No, this is good.
Right, perfect.
So thank you so much, Jennifer, for that intro. And like Dr. Bryant said, we were lucky enough to be a part of that small class who could go into the archives, look into the Kalliope printed copies as well as the digital copies. And it struck a chord with me because it was one of those instances where I started to think about pedagogy at a whole new level, because I started to think about it in terms of multimodal form of learning, and I started to think how could it engage the students more and more. And something which really intrigued me throughout all of these copies was the visual art. Like Ruth said, the visual art and the cover images, they complemented the text that was present. So I made this small slideshow so that I can just walk you all through what I felt and how that led me to use Kalliope in one of these assignments. So I basically looked at three primary issues, which belonged to January 1, 1979, the first issue, January 1, 1999, the second issue, the one that Dr. Bryant was talking about, and the third one, June 1, 2003. These three issues were my primary point of focus, and I was really blown away by how well they complemented the text. So for example, if we look at this, this is a very strong image of that maternal figure, right? The idealistic woman guided by the angels. And this is a woman who is Judith Gefter, a great photojournalist, the guest photographer of this issue. And this picture was named Cosmetic Surgery. So against the backdrop of the 1970s, which we know was this time where the second wave of feminism was ushering in, I think these reignited those conversations about, the set old conventional gender roles and, that aspiration to sort of reach that idealistic standards of beauty. And similarly, if we look at, these two issues, this one especially, which is the same picture which is present here, but just blurred in the background. And I don't know if this is a transistor or a radio or some sort of machine, but in the editor's note, they said this is more like a fusion of the old and the new, where this refers to the contemporary geometric patterns. And I think this could be a shout out to the scientific technical advancements of the age, because it was, this year that saw a huge boom in the usage of internet in schools and e-commerce as well. And again, the content in these issues had a very, very deeply rooted sense of I, which was also more like a counterbalance to the external journey, because the sense of this inward journey, getting back to yourself, that was prominent throughout the issue. And this is again something which really caught my eye, because I personally associated this kind of a mirror with these sentimental heroines, women in cinema. But I was surprised to find that none of these objects actually are associated with a particular gender. They are in fact gender neutral and connecting to the macroscopic world, echoing what is in that particular issue. And I loved how women were shown in a physical fight, which to me, it spoke against the stereotypical connection of rage and men. And I think it normalizes, it humanizes rage as this complex emotion, but again, a very normal human emotion. So placing side by side, it actually spoke to me as a voice of the undercurrents of the social trends that were there, that were shaping that particular century. And I felt like this is something that my students should also view it as. And this is, I really like this particular piece, which is from the 2003 issue. And as Dr. Bryant mentioned, it actually reminded me of Gertrude Stein. Because in this entire piece, it's just unrestrained, passionate speech, but without any punctuation, any full stop, comma, colon, semicolon. It's just, this told me that Kalliope was this safe space for the women to sort of experiment with the language while expressing, their thoughts, their opinions. So this was the experience that I took for myself when we visited the archives and when we did the digital archival thing. And this is what I felt like aiming for when I would teach my students, to encourage them to not just engage critically in terms of the literal level, but also, use all of the visual data that they have. So this is one assignment that I curated, which I plan to use later on when I teach, where I ask them to browse through 3 issues of the magazine from the year that they are born, so that they find that sense of connection. And then I ask them to analyze a common trope or theme that they have been able to identify in the issues, or use it as a voice of the contemporary social trends. And then I ask them to connect it to some other literary work or some other artistic work, so that they see Calliope not just as a literal isolated unit, but a part of something bigger, something more expansive, like it really was. This is just the first part of the assignment. And the second part of the assignment was the recreation, something that Dr. Bryant again talked about while she was introducing this. So for this one, I wanted them to create a collage or a video or a reel or a TikTok that they think is the best representative of the theme that they have chosen. And instead of the fiction and magazine, I would ask them to put in pictures or haikus, or the second option would be to ask them to create an alternative cover page. So my aim in this whole thing is to make them see Calliope as a voice of the social undercurrents, see Calliope as this alternative space which gives voice to a very wide, very diverse range of artistic creativity. And I also want them to try out that creativity that they have in themselves. So I want them to use art as a form where they can express themselves. And I think because I envision this as a part of the curriculum which is supposed to be taught to the Gen Z people, I think connecting it with the modern tech, the social media, the TikTok, the Reel. I think it's gonna be, a great time for them. I think they are gonna not just see this as an assignment, but as an experience. And I aim to make them, enjoy this as much as they learn from it. So that would, was my take from Calliope. Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Okay, our
Thanks
next
a lot.
presenter is Abiola Emmanuel. Abiola is a PhD student whose interests are in diaspora literature with a focus on Africa and Latin America, migration studies, post-colonial methodologies, and women's writing. She also enjoys creative writing. Abiola?
Okay,
So
yeah,
we can
maybe
move
I'll
to-
start from the first slide, talking about how I was struck by the presentation of image and text in the January 1979 issue of the Kalliope. That was when we went to the archive during one of our classes with Professor Bryant. And from all of the works that were presented in that issue, I was struck by Judith Gefter's work on cosmetic surgery for her photographs, and then Sharon Wilson's poem, which explored the relationship between women and their bodies. And I saw that bringing together these different forms of communication, image and text, could give us very innovative ways of looking at issues relating to women. So I designed an assignment, a literature assignment around those themes. So in my presentation today, I'm going to cover 3 areas. I will examine Judith Gefter and Sharon Wilson's presentation of photography and poetry in ways that question conventional ideas about women's bodies. Then I will analyze the intersection of image and text in communicating ideas in new ways, and then describe the literature assignment that I gave to my students. But before I go into how the works of Gefter and Wilson work together to challenge conventional or dominant ideas about female beauty or female bodies, I want us to talk briefly about what these women were working against, so that students can have a perspective and can situate their own research within the right context. So on this screen, we have examples of conventional beauty photographs. If you look at these pictures, you see that they follow a particular formula. The female faces that we have here, they are airbrushed, they are filtered, no pores in sight, no lines, no wrinkles. So, and they have perfect proportions. And this is just how the beauty industry and conventional expectations about women's beauty, how they mask the process in beauty construction, the usually painful process, the labor that goes into it. And the only thing we normally see is the celebration of the perfect result. So Gefter gives this counter narrative. These pictures are taken from a collection of pictures that were printed in the Calliope edition. And we see from looking at these pictures that they are unfiltered presentations of surgical procedures. The setting is in a clinic, and we see medical apparatus all around. When you look at this picture, what comes to mind is the idea of women's body as sites of violent intervention, not perfection, because these pictures are somehow very painful to look at. You see the tightly stitched eyes of the woman. And one important thing that stuck out to me while looking at this picture is the fact that Gefter privileges the process of creating beauty over the final product. She exposes the pain, the struggle, the violence that usually goes along with that. So in my assignment, I plan to guide students through a critical analysis of these pictures. Then we will use this poem in that assignment too. The poem titled August on Bourbon Street, All Nude Review by Sharon Wilson. In this poem, the poet presents the issues in this poem from the perspective of a woman watching another woman performing in a club. And then I highlighted all these important words, the key phrases. So the assignment will require students to look at these phrases, look at the diction, and see how this poet succeeds in using this diction to challenge the dominant narrative about how a female body should look. Then students will also be guided to think about this portrayal and determine for themselves whether this portrayal challenges or confirms conventional standards of beauty when they are putting together their assignment. So the first stage in the assignment will be to analyze the poem. That is, they look at the perspective, look at the focus in the poem, see how it's shifted from the male gaze to a female gaze. Then see how there is authenticity in the way the female body is portrayed with all its imperfections, and then identify examples of visual and tactile details like cellulite, stretch marks, and the rest. Then the second phase will be to do a comparative analysis between Wilson's poem and Gefter's photography, and ask themselves these guiding questions. How is the female gaze privileged in these two works? And then they can ask themselves another helpful question. Does Wilson's textual images amplify or challenge the issues raised in Gefter's photography? That will give them a very good opportunity to look at how different ways of communication, how they interact across different platforms, like how image text interact. So this slide is just to give students an idea of what happens when image meets text. At the background is one of Gefter's photography, and the line above, our eyes shadowed and lined, is taken from Wilson's poem. So students will be encouraged to do a critical analysis of these two modes of communication and see whether the text serves to amplify the ideas suggested by what we have in this picture, or makes us see those ideas in a different way. So this is a description of the whole assignment. Students will analyze the photographs of Gefter and Sharon Wilson's poem, and they will see how those works challenge conventional notions of a desirable female body. So the step one is the image analysis. They will look at the photographic techniques employed by Gefter, the angle, lighting, and things like that. Then see whether there are elements in the poem that challenge conventional standards of beauty. They will do something similar. Students will do something similar with Wilson's work. That will be a textual analysis, mainly focused on diction and how this is used to portray the female body. Then the third step will require them to bring together their discovery from analyzing the first two works, bring them together and see how images and text shape meaning in new ways. And what they will do after doing that is to write a 700-word analytical essay in which they will explore the effect of image-text intersection in redefining and critiquing conventional beauty norms. So I envisioned this assignment as something that will give students a wonderful opportunity to explore and expand their analytical and critical thinking abilities. Because usually when we teach literature, the focus is on text, but after looking at the various editions of Kalliope Magazine and how the editorial choice to include both text and image helped me to see things from a different perspective, I also feel that students can benefit from applying the same approach. So my conclusion is that using Kalliope Magazine as a pedagogical tool offers multimodal analytical training to students in the digital age, and the integration of visual and textual elements opens interesting conversations on issues affecting women. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. Okay, so those conclude our student presentations. I want to go ahead and see if anybody has any questions for either Flo, Marsha, or any of the students. In the meantime, I will go ahead and get it started. I'll go back to Marsha for a second. Obviously, Calliope spans, 30 years, and your students are looking at it 20 years after it's actually stopped publication even. So when your students have been looking at it, what are the things that they are like most surprised at? Do they have any like culture shock moments of the era when they're looking at it?
Yeah, sorry, my computer beeped at me. Yeah, they do. I mean, now I must say that I do have kind of an advantage. I'm teaching in Florida, and I have some students from Jacksonville, and so they found it relatable. Sometimes the image that Annesha showed with looks like a cassette tape, a kind of digital. A lot of students commented on that, and they said yes, the tech is different, but it made them think about, say, some of the social media technologies they're using, like the TikTok. That came up earlier in Annesha's presentation. And it made them think about that fusion of a classical image and something technology. A lot of the students felt it kind of spoke to their experience as whatever you're studying at school. If it's the periodic table of elements, like you're looking at something that's been handed down, but you're using new tools to do it. So yeah, they thought that was cool. And I thought it was interesting how several of the students related to just everyday life, that poems don't always have to be about a famous statue at a museum. They don't always have to be about looking at, a Greek temple. They don't always have to be about, an ancient Nigerian or Kenyan ceremony and the rituals we have and say, the desert southwest of the U.S. So yeah, they felt they were inspired that their everyday lives, And then finally, maybe that goes back to what I said first about like social media, because a lot of social media is about their everyday life. So I think, yeah, in terms of some of the topics, they felt it did, it was a generation gap. But in terms of communicating your everyday life, and especially letting newcomer poets get published too, not just established. So yeah, maybe it could be a way of thinking about social media. I don't know.
That sort of leads into another question we have here in the chat, which is we have a faculty member who's curious about how relatable some of the themes are to younger students. And I'll open that up to any of the presenters who've used this as a teaching tool in their classroom. Like, do the younger kids get it, or are the travails of the 1970s and the 1980s just like unrelatable these days? Go ahead, Annesha.
So I think the topics that Kalliope deals with, I think that are perennial. So I think one of the aspects which makes Kalliope timeless is, the complex emotions that it deals with, that it tries to get to the surface. The things that are generally taboo, not talked about, like Kalliope talks about body dysmorphia or the spiritual quest or the longing in relationships that, women are hesitant to sort of say out loud. I think because the human emotions that these issues bring to the surface are so timeless, it's more or less are relatable, irrespective of the generation that the students belong to, because they find themselves in similar human experiences. Even though the external factors are very different, the emotions that they ignite are, very much the same. So I think Kalliope is relatable in, those terms. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead, Marsha. Audio, you need to unmute yourself.
I was trying to get my hand to go down, but anyway, yeah, here we go. So yeah, the specific question to get back to is print literature or things like literary magazines, is that a dying form? It's interesting, the first Calliope discussion in my class I'm teaching now, somebody raised that question, right? They said that in Gainesville, the Friends of the Library bookstore, that you could go and there's literary magazines for like 10 cents or a bundle of 5 for like 25 cents. So in terms of commercial value, and I think, I just have the good fortune of teaching alongside younger generation teachers, like the ones you see in our squares. But I think students still will buy a graphic novel. They will still buy, Alison Bechdel. They will buy Neil Gaiman, right? And so, yeah, it's interesting that one, I would say, looking at the literary magazine as an image text, like some of our student presenters were talking about, but also, my Gen Z students I'm teaching right now, so they are freshmen through seniors, they're collecting vinyl records. When I'm retiring at the end of this year, so if I have 2 copies of books or a book I can't read the font anymore, even with these, I'll bring them, they always want them. They pick them up and they go, old book smell. They tell me there's a cologne called Old Book Smell now. So yeah, I think that's a really brilliant question. Like, is the print form of a literary magazine dying or not? If you're a creative writer and you want a job like the people in our MFA program have, yeah, you need to be in one of these, longstanding street cred for, centuries journal. So yeah, I don't know if our jury has figured that out yet. I'll be interested to see what happens.
So related, okay, Abiola, go ahead, and then I have a related question.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to what Professor Bryant just said about the challenge of keeping literary text in print media. I want to talk about this question about short form poetry dying out in print form. I think that is true because the prose form of literature is more popular with the younger generation than poetry. But one way that I'm thinking of that can be used to mitigate this negative trend is to integrate image text into the publication of poetry, short poems in a literary magazine, or using graphics. I think that can capture the interest of the younger generation.
Great. Okay, so I have a related question to the focus on print media, which is basically, again, open to all of you who've been able to do this. Clearly, you are able to interact with both the physical copies of Calliope in the archive at UF, as well as the digital copies, which we have provided online. Do you find that students react to them differently in some way at all?
Okay, well, for me, I have not had the opportunity of trying this assignment out on students. I'm still looking forward to making use of it when I'm teaching something related to feminist literature. So, but I would like to believe that they would enjoy it because the last time we went there as a class, we went to the archive as a class, it was a very, very nice experience. We enjoyed handling the physical copies of those magazines, going through the letters and everything, and I had a nice time there. So I have every good reason to believe that if I take my students there too, they would feel similarly.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to check to see if there are any last comments. I see that we have Tim, which would be Tim Gilmore, I do believe. He is in the comments saying that he loves the dialectic or discourse of the better known artists and emerging new artists. And he had recently used Calliope to research the artist Memphis Wood, who was local to this area. And he found articles in photography focused on her, a poem about her by the well-known poet Denis Levertov, and an interview with Levertov by UNF's Bill Slaughter, who was a major force in local literature here as well. He also wasn't aware that Joy Harjo had been connected with Calliope, which probably means he hasn't stood near me when I get on my Calliope soapbox, which I do fairly frequently. So congratulations, Tim, on having missed that experience. But he's interested in finding out the intersections of better known and local and emerging artists that are in Calliope, and we can obviously help that from the archive. And yes, obviously, we have another faculty member commenting, Margaret Atwood, too. And we do also have video of Margaret Atwood from when she came and audio of Alice Walker and Gwendolyn Brooks. I think I have the audio of the Gwendolyn Brooks interview that they did. Also, just to let all of you know, something that I've meant to mention, we did recently also digitize the Stereo 90 performance recordings of Calliope. So at some point in the not distant future, we will also have available for you some of the writers from Calliope reading their and other works from the journal aloud as part of the radio presentations that they did for several years. And I thought that might be interesting for your students too, to see how they perform those works in their own voices at times. Yes, Marsha.
I'm gonna do these things one at a time. So yeah, I'm loving this discussion. So yeah, 3 quick things. So about the famous, I've actually assigned the Calliope interview with Gwendolyn Brooks, whom I was just wowed to get to hear her read twice, once at the University of Illinois, once in Chicago. And so for my students, I think just seeing, going back to something Tim was saying, just seeing established writers and solidarity and affiliation with younger writers. The second thing I would say is, and this goes back to the digital archive, which is mostly what I use because with my bigger classes, but I just want to give a shout out to Florida State College at Jacksonville because it is one of the best flip technology digital archives. And so I think part of what might bridge this time gap is the digital archive, right? I mean, it doesn't have all the colors as some of the covers do in the print. But yeah, my students they admire the technology. They like, because it's digitized, perhaps you could use it in a class about image text together, right? So yeah, like a web comic, you could look at the layout of some Calliope in the web comic. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing, I'm going to, I think it's, yeah, Andrina from the class I was quoting from. I think what might survive, and maybe it's not going to be the print literary magazine as we've known it, but I think going back to what I first talked about, community, literary magazines establish communities. And so my student Andrina, in her worksheet, one category was like editorial presence. And she said, quote, "It mentions financial means along with efforts." This is just the digital archive. It mentions financial means along with efforts of Calliope to support local communities, homeless shelters, YWCA, and shelters for abused women. I have 2 current students who work at Gainesville's Peaceful Paths, which is a shelter for abused women. I have students that volunteer to feed homeless citizens here in Gainesville. So yeah, that I think just seeing the trace the marks of community for whatever one's causes may be, I think that's something that the literary form, that the print form preserves. And then we're lucky because we have this fabulous digital archive.
Right, fantastic. That feels like a good note to end on. So I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us today. This recording will be available at some point in the not distant future on the library's YouTube. I'll send out a link for that. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.